Hi, I'm Eva from China. Welcome to my channel. Hong Kong is going through a massive wave of business closures and layoffs. In just a few years, the city has undergone a dramatic transformation, still familiar yet strangely unfamiliar to me. Once a beacon in the region, it's now often mocked by mainland netizens as just another ordinary Chinese city. As many of us born in the 80s and raised in Shenzhen, under the cultural influence of Hong Kong, we grew up idolizing Hong Kong pop music, cinema and TV dramas, and the city's legendary success stories. Back then, the East meets West cultural fusion makes Hong Kong so glamorous and mysterious, distant yet dazzling. I first visited Hong Kong around 1999. I was struck by how busy, efficient, and smart everyone seemed. The city felt orderly and safe, an absolute contrast to the chaotic Shenzhen of the time. People were friendly, some curious about a teenager from the mainland like me. Policemen were serious but polite and respectful, totally different from the ones I knew. I even got picked to go on the stage to participate some fun activities during a show at Ocean Park, probably because I was obviously the only non-local kid there. That small gesture was really warm. It was the first time I felt lucky in my life, and still the only time I got this kind of luck up to now. Back then, in resource-scarce, hyper-competitive Shenzhen, being a little girl meant often being overlooked. But in Hong Kong, I felt welcomed without having to fight for it. The whole city left a huge impression on me. It made me feel seen, safe, hopeful, and it actually shaped part of my personality afterwards. That trip was probably my earliest and best memory of Hong Kong. Unfortunately, after a few years of growing up, and I started to visit Hong Kong more often for shopping, banking, and then eventually business, each subsequent visit became more disappointing. I still respected its governance, business culture, and the social order, but the growing tensions between locals and the mainland visitors were impossible to ignore. From high-end malls to roadside eateries, the hostility became blatant, and it wasn't targeted, it was across the board. Yes, I understand some mainland tourists have caused frustration, but I was always respectful and followed the rules, yet I still get the cold shoulder, even sarcasm over the smallest things. Visiting Hong Kong became stressful for me. At one point, I even tried speaking in my awkward Cantonese out of respect, but it wasn't appreciated. Strangely, switching to English worked much better. People's attitudes would change instantly, sometimes even apologetically, when they realized my English was stronger than theirs. That gave me mixed feelings. Anyway, I grew older and more relaxed. Now I would just speak my Mandarin without much self-consciousness. If they are friendly, great. If not, I don't care anymore. In recent years, with fewer mainland tourists, the economic impact on Hong Kong has been immediate, and attitudes have softened in some way, perhaps out of necessity. But even if locals are nicer now, the truth is many people have simply lost interest in Hong Kong. The city no longer holds the same core charm or strategic advantage it once had. I love Hong Kong for how unique it was. Now, as it becomes more like any other Chinese city, it just feels like a loss. As for the current wave of closures and the layoffs, the warning signs were there even during the pandemic. When restrictions finally lifted, Hong Kong's consumption rebound didn't happen as expected. In fact, the reverse did. In 2024, the number of Hong Kong residents visiting the mainland was double that of mainlanders visiting Hong Kong. Every day now, you will find quite many Hong Kongers shopping and dining in Shenzhen, getting dental treatment done, or just hanging out. I even ran into a whole family of them, excitedly discussing the escape room experience, hidden inside an old factory in some old, rusty corners in Shenzhen. They are really exploring the city now. Hong Kong hasn't just been abandoned by mainland consumers, it's also being abandoned by its own people. The food and beverage sector are in deep crisis. Mid to high-end restaurants are barely hanging on, and long-standing brands are closing one after another. Rents in prime areas have been slashed by half. The only kind of dining that seems to be thriving is the cheap 2-dish meal box for under 50 Hong Kong dollars. It's nearly impossible for Hong Kong's retail, service, and the tourism industries to return to their former peak, I think, because mainland cities are catching up in many areas and even taking the lead in some. Meanwhile, the overall purchasing power across China is still declining. That means the cake is getting smaller, yet more people are trying to grab a slice. But these areas are just the tip of the iceberg. Even Hang Seng Bank recently began layoffs. Normally, layoffs at a single bank during an economic downturn like this wouldn't make major headlines. But Hang Seng's financial index performance was off the charts. Hang Seng is one of the city's largest banks, with the most branches and the reputation as a top-tier institution. Nearly every Hong Konger has an account there. The official reasons for layoffs include weak economic outlook, global uncertainty, AI replacing jobs, etc. But what really raised eyebrows, I think, was its 2024 non-performing loan ratio, which is 6.12%. To put that in perspective, the average non-performing loan ratio among Hong Kong banks is around 2%, but most other banks are multinational and their business covered all different areas, while Hang Seng is more focused on Hong Kong and the mainland. And the average ratio among the major mainland Chinese banks are at 1.5%. If one of these mainstream mainland banks ever reported a 6% rate, it probably wouldn't survive a single day. Now with Hang Seng 6% as a reference, people start to wonder that 1.5% of the Chinese mainland banks seems a little bit too good to be true. Hang Seng's total assets are around 1.8 trillion Hong Kong dollars. It's argued that their loan classification is stricter than other banks. That figure likely represents hundreds of billions in bad loans, roughly equivalent to 3 or 5 years of profits. It's manageable, sure. Any century-old institution would go through rough years for sure, but this reflects something deeper, a systemic risk of Hong Kong's economy. Higher US dollar interest rates, a depressed property market, shrinking consumer spending, and perhaps most significantly, deteriorating US-China relations. All of these are piling on top of Hong Kong, and more layoffs and closures are probably coming. Industries that once benefited from being on both sides of the US-China relationship, like finance and investment, are now stuck in the middle. Once seen as a bridge or window, the city is now treated as a fence-sitter, and with foreign capital fleeing, its role as an international financial hub is no longer secure. Meanwhile, domestic financial centers like Shenzhen and Shanghai are rising fast, making no room for Hong Kong to become one. Hong Kong's stock market has been dry for a long time. Even IPOs struggle to raise significant capital. Its export trade has fallen out of the global top 10, also due to competition from ports in mainland China. Its tourism, retail, and food appeal has been overtaken by the mainland. The city's infamous service attitude certainly doesn't help. At this point, many mainland tourists visit just to see what a former colony looks like. As for innovation, after years of shifting from manufacturing to finance, the industrial chain has been left incomplete, and the government support is weak. In sectors like EVs, where market education costs extremely high, adoption has been painfully slow. Out of 18,000 taxis in the city, only 56 are electric, basically 0% adoption. And with the public finances tight, the Hong Kong government has been cutting back on welfare in recent years. Promoting new industries through subsidies is becoming harder and harder. Hong Kong has tried to position itself in areas the mainland avoids or apply stricter regulations, like blockchain, Bitcoin, and virtual assets. It may work as a testing ground, but the moment these sectors grow too big, they will likely be pulled back into the broader policy framework. Without real policy differentiation or a role as a diplomatic bridge, Hong Kong becomes increasingly just another mediocre Chinese city. Of course, not all is lost. First and foremost, I think, capital mobility remains its biggest strength. This gives Hong Kong an edge in wealth management aimed at mainland clients. Second, for export business like my own, Hong Kong still offers conveniences in tax rebates and overseas money flows. Third, high-end healthcare. While cities in the neighborhood like Shenzhen have begun to absorb simpler services like dental care and rehab, Hong Kong remains a preferred choice for complex procedures, thanks to better regulation and greater transparency in the system. And then there's education. Hong Kong strikes a unique balance between credentialism and holistic development, with a high degree of internationalization. Recently, when Trump clashed with Harvard and froze student visas, many families around me turned to Hong Kong as a backup. Even before that, as China's middle class began to shrink a few years ago, many saw Hong Kong as a cheaper overseas option. That trend continues. Still, many parents who choose Hong Kong for education don't actually like its social atmosphere. It's often a choice made with the compromise and the sacrifice. If only Hong Kong's local culture could release some of its inattention, be less defensive, less harsh, and drop the obsession with historical success, well, I believe the city would rediscover its charm in the eyes of mainlanders.